6th of January, 1945-49. B-29s were withdrawn from airfields in China by the end of January 1945. Throughout the prior period, B-29 raids were also launched from China and India against many other targets throughout Southeast Asia, including a series of raids on Singapore and Thailand. On the 2nd of November, 1944, 55 B-29s raided Bangkok's Bang Siu marshalling yards in the largest raid of the war. 7 RTAF Nakarjamaki 43 abusers from Phoon Bin, Air Group, 16 and 14 Ijafki 43s attempted intercept. A TUF FLT Lieutenant that Sakwarasap attacked a B-29, damaging it, but was shot down by a turn fire. 1 B-29 was lost, possibly the one damaged by FLT-LT Vidsak.F. On the 14th of April, 1945, a second B-29 raid on Bangkok destroyed 2 key power plants and was the last major attack conducted against Thai targets. 45. The B-29 effort was gradually shifted to the new bases in the Mariana Islands in the Central Pacific, with the last B-29 combat mission from India flown on the 29th of March 1945. B-29 a 30 BN, 42 to 94,106, on a long-range mission New Mariana Islands air bases. In addition to the logistical problems associated with operations from China, the B-29 could reach only a limited part of Japan while flying from Chinese bases. The solution to this problem was to capture the Mariana Islands, which would bring targets such as Tokyo, about 1,500 mi, 2,400 kilometers, north of the Marianas within range of B-29 attacks. The Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed in December 1943 to seize the Marianas. 54. U.S. forces invaded Saipan on the 15th of June, 1944. Despite a Japanese naval counterattack which led to the Battle of the Philippine Sea and heavy fighting on land, Saipan was secured by 9 July. 55. Operations followed against Guam and Tinian, with all 3 islands secured by August. 56. Naval Construction Battalions, CBs, began at once to construct air bases suitable for the B-29, commencing even before the end of ground fighting. 55. In all, 5 major airfields were built, 2 on the flat island of Tinian, 1 on Saipan, and 2 on Guam. Each was large enough to eventually accommodate a bomb wing consisting of 4 bomb groups, giving a total of 180 B-29s per airfield. 44. These bases could be supplied by ship and, unlike the bases in China, were not vulnerable to attack by Japanese ground forces. The bases became the launch sites for the large B-29 raids against Japan in the final year of the war. First B-29 arrived on Saipan on the 12th of October, 1944, and the first combat mission was launched from there on 28 October, 1944, with 14 B-29s attacking the Truk Atoll. The 73rd Bomb Wing launched the first mission against Japan from bases in the Marianas, on the 24th of November, 1944, sending 111 B-29s to attack Tokyo. For this first attack on the Japanese capital since the Doolittle raid in April, 1942, 73rd Bomb Wing Commander Brigadier General Emmett O'Donnell Jr. acted as mission command pilot in B-29 Dauntless. The campaign of incendiary raids started with the bombardment of Kobe on the 4th of February, 1945. Then peaked early with the most destructive bombing raid in history, even when the later silver plate-flown nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are considered. 57. On the night of 9–10 of March, 1945 on Tokyo. From then on, the raids intensified, being launched regularly until the end of the war. The attacks succeeded in devastating most large Japanese cities, with the exception of Kyoto and 4 that were reserved for nuclear attacks, and gravely damaged Japan's war industries. Although less publicly appreciated, the mining of Japanese ports and shipping routes, Operation Starvation, carried out by B-29s from April 1945 reduced Japan's ability to support its population and move its troops. The nuclear weapons. The most famous B-29s were the Silver Plate series. These aircraft were extensively modified to carry nuclear weapons. Serious consideration was given to using the British Lancaster bomber, as this would require less modification. 58, 59. The most significant modification was the enlargement of the bomb bay, enabling each aircraft to carry either the Thin Man or Fat Man weapons. These Silver Plate bombers differed from other B-29s then in service by having fuel injection and reversible props. Also, to make a lighter aircraft, the Silver Plate B-29s were stripped of all guns, except for those on the tail. Pilot Charles Sweeney credits the reversible props for saving Boxcar after making an emergency landing on Okinawa following the Nagasaki bombing. 60. Boxcar and a post-war MKII nuclear weapon painted to resemble a Fat Man bomb Enola Gay, flown by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped the first bomb called Little Boy on Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945. 61. Enola Gay is fully restored and on display at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, outside Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles W. Sweeney, dropped the second bomb, called Fat Man, on Nagasaki 3 days later. 62. Boxcar is on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. 63. Following the surrender of Japan, called VJ Day, B-29s were used for other purposes. A number supplied POWs with food and other necessities by dropping barrels of rations on Japanese POW camps. In September 1945, a long-distance flight was undertaken for public relations purposes. Generals Barney M. Giles, Curtis LeMay, and Emmett O'Donnell Jr. piloted 3 specially modified B-29s from Shitos Air Base in Hokkaido to Chicago Municipal Airport, continuing to Washington, D.C., the farthest non-stop distance, c.6,400 miles, to that date flown by U.S. Army Air Forces aircraft and the first ever non-stop flight from Japan to Chicago. G. 65. 2 months later, Colonel Clarence S. Irvine commanded another modified B-29, Pacusson Dreamboat, in a world record-breaking long-distance flight from Guam to Washington, D.C., traveling 7,916 miles, 12,740 kilometers, in 35 hours, 66, with a gross takeoff weight of 155,000 pounds, 70,000 kilograms. 67. Almost a year later, in October 1946, the same B-29 flew 9,422 miles non-stop from Oahu, Hawaii, to Cairo, Egypt, in less than 40 hours, demonstrating the possibility of routing airlines over the polar ice cap. 68. B-29s in Europe and Australia. Royal Air Force Washington B.1 of No. 90 Squadron IF based at RAF Mahamud House considered for other theatres, and briefly evaluated in the UK. The B-29 was exclusively used in World War II in the Pacific Theatre. The use of YB-29 BW-41 to 36,393, the so-named Hobo Queen, one of the service test aircraft flown around several British airfields in early 1944, 69, was part of Ada's information program from its mention in an American published Sternenbanner German-language propaganda leaflet from Leap Year Day in 1944, meant to have circulated within the week. 70. with the intent to deceive the Germans into believing that the B-29 would be deployed to Europe. 25. American post-war military assistance programs loaned the IF-87 Superfortresses to equip 8 IF bomber command squadrons. The aircraft was known as the Washington B-1 in IF service and served from March 1950 until the last bombers were returned in March 1954. 71. Deployment was restricted to long-range training for strategic attacks against the Soviet Union, which was beyond the range of the IF's Avro Linkers. The phase-out was occasioned by deliveries of English electric Canberra bombers. 72. 3 Washington's modified for errant duties and a standard bomber version used for support by No. 192 Squadron IF were decommissioned in 1958, being replaced by de Havilland Comet aircraft. 2 British Washington B-1 aircraft were transferred to the Royal Australian Air Force, RAF, in 1952. 73. They were attached to the Aircraft Research and Development Unit and used in trials conducted on behalf of the British Ministry of Supply. 73. Both aircraft were placed in storage in 1956 and were sold for scrap in 1957. 74. Soviet Tupolev Tu-4. Tupolev Tu-4 at Monino Museum. At the end of World War II, Soviet development of modern 4-engine heavy bombers lagged behind the West. The Petlyakov P-8 Diesel heavy bomber operated by the Soviet Air Forces first flew in 1936. Intended to replace the obsolete Tupolev TB3, only 93 P-8s were built by the end of World War II. During 1944 and 1945, 4 B-29s made emergency landings in Soviet territory after bombing raids on Japanese Manchuria and Japan. In accordance with Soviet neutrality in the Pacific War, the bombers were interned by the Soviets despite American requests for their return. Rather than return the aircraft, the Soviets reverse-engineered the American B-29s and used them as a pattern for the Tupolev Tu-4. 75. On the 31st of July 1944, Tramp, serial number 42 to 6256, of the United States Army Air Force's 462nd, very heavy, bomb group was diverted to Vladivostok, Russia, after an engine failed and the propeller could not feather. H. This B-29 was part of a 100 aircraft raid against the Japanese Showa steel mill in Angshan, Manchuria. 75. On the 20th of August, 1944, Kate Palmat, 42 to 93,829, flying from Chengdu, was damaged by anti-aircraft gunfire during a raid on the Yafta Iron Works. Due to the damage it sustained, the crew elected to divert to the Soviet Union. The aircraft crashed in the foothills of Sikhotalin mountain range east of Khabarovsk after the crew bailed out. On the 11th of November, 1944, during a night raid on Omura in Kyushu, Japan, the General H. Arnold Special, 42 to 6365, was damaged and forced to divert to Vladivostok in the Soviet Union. The crew weighs into. 76. On the 21st of November, 1944, Dinghao, 42 to 6358, was damaged during a raid on an aircraft factory at Aurora and was also forced to divert to Vladivostok. The interned crews of these 4 B-29s were allowed to escape into American-occupied Iran in January 1945, but none of the B-29s were returned after Stalin ordered the Tupolev OKB to examine and copy the B-29 and produce a design ready for quantity production as soon as possible. 76. Because aluminum in the USSR was supplied in different gauges from that available in the US, metric C Imperial, 75, the entire aircraft had to be extensively re-engineered. In addition, Tupolev substituted his own favored airfoil sections for those used by Boeing, with the Soviets themselves already having their own Wright R-1820-derived 18-cylinder radial engine. The Schwarzkopf 73 of comparable power and displacement to the B-29's duplex Cyclone radials available to power their design. In 1947, the Soviets debuted both the Tupolev Tu-4, NATO ASCC code-named Bull, and the Tupolev Tu-70 transport variant. The Soviets used tailgun